uncover the enigmatic legacy of the House of Bonaparte, the imperial family that conquered Europe while concealing scandals more treacherous than the fog of war at Waterloo. Hailing from Corsican nobility, with deep Italian origins linked to Gianfaldo Buonaparte in Sarzana circa 1200, this dynasty skyrocketed to dominance under Napoleon I, 1769 to 1821. Seizing power through his daring 18 Brumaire coup in 1799, he established the First French Empire in 1804, reigning until 1815. His nephew Napoleon III revived the glory with the Second Empire from 1852 to 1870, amassing a fortune estimated at $1 to $2 billion in today's terms through imperial taxes, colonial ventures, and expropriated lands. Napoleon elevated his brothers and sisters to thrones in Spain, Naples, Holland, and Westphalia. Yet beneath the splendor of the Napoleonic Code, Louvre enhancements, and sweeping cultural reforms lurk dark enigmas that parallel the dramas of contemporary powerhouses, like the Windsors or Redstones. Tales of assassinations, secret, illegitimate offspring, scheming and exile, and devastating betrayals resonate across eras, evoking the Palaiologos dynasty's intrigues or the cutthroat tactics of media tycoons. While the Goulds squandered their riches, the Bonapartes' impact lingered through living heirs and persistent Bonapartist aspirations, mirroring the Grosvenors' enduring prestige. Join us in this video as we reveal the concealed stories, illicit romances, toxic pacts, and controversies poised to upend historical narratives, trace Napoleon's ascent and the empire's cataclysmic downfalls post-Waterloo and the Franco-Prussian War. Subscribe and like for deeper dives into elite dynasties. Unlock the Bonaparte mysteries today. From new money to old money. The story of the House of Bonaparte begins with a family rooted in the rugged landscapes of Corsica, an island in the Mediterranean Sea that has long been a crossroads of cultures and conflicts. Originally known as the Buonapartes, they emerge from minor nobility with Italian origins, tracing their lineage back to Francesco Buonaparte, who settled in Corsica in the late 15th century after leaving Sarzana in Liguria. Nicknamed the Moor of Sarzana due to his dark complexion, or perhaps his adventurous spirit, Francesco established the family among the island's lesser nobles, building a life through local politics, law, and modest estates. This wasn't the kind of ancient inherited wealth that defined Europe's old aristocratic families. Instead, it was new money earned through grit and opportunity, much like the pioneering efforts of Mary Brickell in the late 1800s. Mary, alongside her husband William, transformed the wild, untamed wilderness around Biscayne Bay in Florida into a thriving real estate empire. They platted land, lent money from cash stashed in drawers, and turned frontier outposts into what became Miami's Millionaire Row, starting from scratch with savvy deals and unyielding determination. Similarly, the Bonapartes hustled on Corsica's rocky terrain, leveraging their minor noble status for influence in a place where survival often meant navigating shifting alliances between Genoa, France, and local independence movements. Napoleon Bonaparte himself was born in 1769 in Ajaccio, the island's capital, just a year after France acquired Corsica from Genoa through a treaty that many locals resented. His parents, Carlo Bonaparte and Letizia Ramolino, were part of this minor nobility. Carlo was a lawyer who dabbled in politics, even supporting Pasquale Pauli's push for Corsican independence against French rule. The family home in Ajaccio, a modest three-story house on Rue Saint-Charles that later became a museum, reflected their status, comfortable but far from opulent, owned continuously from 1682 until 1923. Growing up, Napoleon felt like an outsider in a French-dominated world, his Italian heritage and thick Corsican accent marking him as different during his time at military schools in mainland France, first at Autun and then Brienne-le-Château, where he endured bullying but honed his sharp intellect and ambition. Initially, he flirted with the idea of Corsican independence, inspired by his father's involvement with Paoli. But as opportunities arose in revolutionary France, he shifted his loyalties, embracing the nation that would propel him to power. Those Corsican estates embodied pure new money energy, fresh, dynamic, and built on local hustle rather than dusty inheritance, echoing how Brickell converted raw land into fortune through bold ventures and community building. The Bonapartes, however, didn't remain in that new money phase for long. They orchestrated a remarkable shift to old money status, weaving together threads of power, culture, and strategic alliances that transformed their image and influence. It all ignited with imperial power under Napoleon I, the ambitious general who masterminded the creation of the First French Empire in 1804. This came after his daring coup on 18 Brumaire in 1799, where he, alongside key figures like Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès and Roger Ducos, overthrew the faltering Directory government in a bloodless maneuver that shifted France from a republic to a consulate, with Napoleon as first consul. By 1804, he crowned himself emperor in a lavish ceremony at Notre Dame Cathedral, placing the crown on his own head to symbolize his self-made authority, ditching the republican pretense entirely. His empire sprawled across Europe, rivaling the ancient reach of the Habsburgs, the Austrian royals who had dominated for centuries through the Holy Roman Empire. That empire dissolved in 1806, partly due to Napoleon's relentless pressures. Franz II, sensing the threat, had preemptively declared himself Emperor of Austria in 1804 to counter Napoleon's rising star. Napoleon's dominance reshaped the continent. He installed puppet kingdoms, redrew borders from Italy to Germany, and forced coalitions to crumble. His rivalry with the Habsburgs climaxed at the Battle of Austerlitz in 1805, where he smashed their armies alongside Russian forces in what's often called his masterpiece, leading to the Peace of Pressburg that stripped Austria of territories and humbled Franz I. This made the Bonapartes appear as timeless rulers almost overnight, like elevating a startup to a global conglomerate through sheer imperial force and strategic brilliance. Cultural patronage further cemented their transition, adding layers of refinement to their raw power. Napoleon invested heavily in expanding the Louvre, evolving it from a former royal palace into a premier world-class museum teeming with treasures. As Musée Napoleon under his rule, with Vivant Denon as director, it showcased spoils from conquests, including masterpieces looted from Italy during the 1796-97 campaigns, over 500 artworks like Veronese's wedding feast at Cana, ancient sculptures such as the Apollo Belvedere, and even Egyptian artifacts from his 1798 expedition. These weren't mere hoardings. They crafted a cultural legacy, filling galleries with confiscated revolutionary and wartime pieces to project enlightened governance and distract from the era's violence. Josephine, his first wife, contributed through her elegant chateau at Malmaison, outside Paris, where she nurtured exotic plants from around the world, including rare species from Australian expeditions like acacias and eucalypts, and hosted intellectual salons amid lush gardens. She even acclimatized animals like kangaroos, emus, and black swans from Nicolas Baudin's voyages, blending art, botany, and sophistication In a way that exuded refined taste, this mirrored the efforts of Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, who channeled her family's fortune, new money turned old from Vanderbilt railroads, into championing American artists. After the Metropolitan Museum rejected her collection in the 1920s, she founded the Whitney Museum in 1930 to spotlight modern art, creating an enduring institution, much like how Josephine and Napoleon used patronage to legitimize and immortalize their ascent. Marriages were pivotal chess moves in securing their elevated status, forging ties that blended love, politics, and dynasty building. Napoleon's union with Josephine de Beauharnais in 1796 started as a passionate love match laced with advantages. She was a sophisticated widow with deep connections in revolutionary salons, aiding his rapid rise through introductions to influential figures like Paul Barras. Their correspondence during his Italian campaigns brimmed with ardor. Josephine's letters were worldly and affectionate, sustaining him amid battles. Yet when no heir materialized after years, Napoleon divorced her in 1809, a heartbreaking decision where she retained her title and malmaison, but it cleared the path for a more dynastic match. In 1810, he wed Marie-Louise, the 19-year-old Archduchess of Austria and great-niece of Marie Antoinette, in a proxy ceremony followed by a grand Paris event. Initially reluctant, Marie-Louise grew fond of him, bearing their son Napoleon II, dubbed the King of Rome, which briefly sealed peace with Austria and intertwined the Bonapartes with Europe's oldest royalty. Post-Napoleon's exile, however, she distanced herself, remarrying and retreating to Parma. This echoed Aristotle Onassis's high-profile alliances. The Greek shipping tycoon married Jackie Kennedy in 1968 on his private island, Scorpios, merging his self-made empire with American Camelot prestige, amid a media frenzy that highlighted power networks but concealed personal strains. Much like Napoleon's unions elevated the family while navigating emotional complexities. Colonial wealth amplified their fortunes dramatically, drawing from vast overseas revenues that fueled extravagance and military might. By installing his brother Joseph as King of Spain in 1808 after invading to target Portugal, Napoleon accessed Spain's colonial riches, silver mines in Mexico like those at Potosi, sugar plantations in the Caribbean, and trade routes yielding gold, tobacco, and other commodities. Though the Peninsular War's guerrilla fighting drained resources, these inflows padded treasuries. Earlier Joseph and later Joachim Murat, as rulers of Naples, tapped Mediterranean commerce, including silk production, olive oil trades, and port duties on goods like wine and grains. The continental system, Napoleon's blockade banning British trade from 1806, aimed to cripple England but strained colonies, hitting Caribbean holdings hard. Haiti, for instance, rebelled in 1804 under Toussaint Louverture and Jean-Jacques Dessalines, ending French slavery there despite Napoleon's attempts to reinstate it elsewhere, marking a loss but underscoring the turbulent wealth flow. This paralleled William Randolph Hearst's media empire built on yellow journalism, sensationalism in newspapers like the San Francisco Examiner, mining fortunes from his father's Anaconda copper, and real estate, funding opulent estates like San Simeon Castle with its lavish pools, zoos, and art collections. Yet scandals, like his role in stoking the Spanish-American War, mirrored Napoleon's exploitative conquests. Yet, the shadow of assassinations and exiles perpetually challenged their legitimacy, infusing their story with intrigue and vulnerability. Plots against Napoleon were relentless. The infernal machine bomb in 1800 nearly killed him en Rue Saint-Nicaise, prompting purges of Jacobins and Royalists. In 1704, A royalist conspiracy led to the controversial execution of the Duc d'Enghien, kidnapped from neutral Baden, fueling Napoleon's paranoia and accusations of tyranny. Family members endured exiles. Joseph fled to America after Waterloo in 1815. Lucian wandered Europe. Jerome bounced from Westphalia to the U.S., and Caroline schemed from afar after her husband Murat's fall. This taint echoed Edward Doheny's Teapot Dome scandal in the 1920s, where the oil baron bribed officials for Wyoming leases, facing corruption charges that ruined his reputation despite acquittal. Much like the Bonapartes' aggressive power grabs invited endless contests and exiles questioning their rule. Turning to their assets, the Bonaparte fortune blended grand estates, trade revenues, cultural icons, and fiscal innovations. Estates stood out. The Tuileries Palace in Paris served as Napoleon's imperial hub until its 1871 burning during the Commune, hosting coronations like his own in 1804 amid opulent gardens, halls adorned with tapestries, and views of the Seine symbolizing French majesty. Across the Atlantic, Point Breeze in Bordentown, New Jersey, became Joseph's exile retreat from 1816. He purchased 1,800 acres along the Delaware River, erecting a 38,000-square-foot mansion with lakes, manicured gardens, secret tunnels, and Napoleonic relics like paintings and furniture. It hosted notables like John Quincy Adams, burned in 1820 possibly from arson, was rebuilt grander, and sold in 1847. But its legacy lingers in local parks preserving the grounds. Trade assets derived from colonial revenues in Spain and Naples, import taxes on American mining outputs, gold and silver from viceroyalties, agricultural duties on olives and silk in Naples, all channeled to family coffers, despite wars eroding profits. The continental system, while harmful to European economies, funneled smuggled British goods through tariffs, padding incomes indirectly. Cultural assets proved enduring powerhouses. The Napoleonic Code of 1804 unified French laws, abolishing feudal privileges, enshrining equality before the law, property rights, and secularism, influencing systems from Latin America to satellites like Belgium and Poland, where it spread via conquest. Louvre collections swelled with looted art, Egyptian obelisks, Italian Renaissance works, though many, like the Venus de Milo remaining, but others repatriated post-1815, left France culturally enriched. Revenues flowed from reformed imperial taxes and confiscated lands. Napoleon ended feudal exemptions with direct land taxes and indirect goods levies, implementing the cadaster system to map properties for equitable assessment, funding vast armies, seized estates from émigrés in the church, sold as biens nationaux during the Revolution, and continued under him, generated billions in francs, stabilizing finances amid post-revolutionary turmoil, and underwriting endless wars. Unlike the Vanderbilts, whose railroad empire fortunes were frittered away by heirs like Cornelius Vanderbilt II through extravagant lifestyles, building marble mansions, hosting lavish balls costing fortunes, and indulging in yachts and parties that depleted 200 million equivalents by the early 20th century, with Gloria Vanderbilt's mother squandering her trust fund on excesses leading to custody battles. The Bonapartes' tangible assets largely vanished in exile. Napoleon perished penniless on St. Helena in 1821. His family dispersed, properties reclaimed by Bourbon restoration. Yet, their cultural legacies endure, akin to Andrew Mellon's philanthropic trusts. The Pittsburgh banker and Treasury Secretary founded the National Gallery of Art in 1937 with his vast collection, funding expansions like Smithsonian editions through vehicles that preserved influence. The Bonaparte's Code reshaped legal frameworks across continents, art legacies, enriched museums, and Bonapartist claims persist through descendants, converting ephemeral dominance into an immortal old money essence. Napoleon I's secret assassination of the Duke of Enghien. In the annals of history, few episodes reveal the brutal calculus of ambition quite like the execution of Louis Antoine, the Duke of Enghien, at the hands of Napoleon Bonaparte in 1804. This was no mere act of justice. It was a calculated strike against a perceived threat, shrouded in secrecy to shield Napoleon from the backlash that would inevitably follow. The Duke, a young prince embodying the fading glory of France's royal past, became a pawn in Napoleon's quest to solidify his grip on power. Falsely accused of involvement in a royalist plot, he was kidnapped from neutral territory, subjected to a hasty trial, and shot in the dead of night. This story unfolds against the backdrop of revolutionary turmoil, where loyalty clashed with survival, and one man's rise meant another's demise. It's a tale that echoes through time, drawing parallels to other ruthless eliminations in the name of dynasty and empire, reminding us how fragile the line is between ruler and tyrant. To grasp the full weight of this event, we must first delve into the life of the man at its center, Louis-Antoine Henri de Bourbon, known as the Duke of Enghien. Born on August 2, 1772, he entered the world amid the opulence of the Château de Chantilly, a sprawling estate north of Paris that served as the countryside retreat for the princes of Condé. This was no ordinary birthplace. Chantilly was a symbol of aristocratic splendor, with its grand gardens, stables, and collections of art that rivaled the royal palaces. As the only legitimate son of Louis-Henri de Bourbon, the Prince of Condé, and Louise Marie-Thérèse Bathilde d'Orléans, the Duke was steeped in royal lineage from the start. His mother Bathilde was far from a peripheral figure. She was the sole surviving daughter of Louis-Philippe d'Orléans, himself a grandson of the infamous regent Philippe d'Orléans. This connection made the young Duke a first cousin to the man who would later become King Louis-Philippe I of France, the citizen king who ruled from 1830 to 1848. Adding layers to his pedigree, the Duke traced his ancestry back to King Louis XIV, the Sun King, through two of the monarch's legitimated daughters, Françoise Marie de Bourbon, Mademoiselle de Blois, and Louise Françoise de Bourbon, Mademoiselle de Nantes. This double descent from the Bourbon line infused his blood with an undeniable claim to France's storied throne, making him a living emblem of the Ancien Regime, even as the winds of revolution began to howl. Family dynamics, however, were anything but regal harmony. In 1778, when the Duke was just 6 years old, his parents' marriage unraveled in a scandal typical of the era's aristocratic excesses. His father, the Prince of Condé, had taken up with Marguerite Catherine Michelot, a talented singer from the Paris Opera, whose allure proved irresistible. This affair not only led to the separation, but also produced two illegitimate daughters, adding half-sisters to the Duke's life and further fracturing the household. Amid this personal upheaval, the young Duke's upbringing remained focused on preparing him for a life of privilege and duty. He received a rigorous private education tailored to his status. The Abbé Milot, a respected scholar and historian known for his works on European history, handled his academic studies, instilling in him a deep knowledge of literature, philosophy, and the classics. For military training, which was essential for a prince of the Condé line, renowned for their warrior heritage, he was tutored by Commodore de Vigneux, a naval officer who emphasized strategy, horsemanship, and the arts of war. From an early age, the Duke displayed a natural aptitude for military life, showing bravery and enthusiasm that would define his brief career. He officially embarked on this path in 1788 at the age of 16, just as the tremors of the French Revolution were beginning to shake the foundations of the monarchy. The storm broke in full force on July 14, 1789, with the fall of the Bastille, a symbol of royal oppression that ignited widespread unrest. The Duke, then 16, found himself caught in the whirlwind. His family, staunch supporters of the Bourbon monarchy, refused to stand idly by as the revolution threatened to dismantle centuries of tradition. Mere days after the Bastille's capture, the Duke, along with his father and grandfather, the elder Prince of Condé, fled France, emigrating to join the growing ranks of royalist exiles determined to fight back. This emigration was not a hasty retreat, but a strategic move to rally support abroad. The Duke threw himself into the cause, working tirelessly to raise forces for an invasion that aimed to restore the monarchy to its absolute form, undoing the revolutionary reforms that had stripped the king of power. By 1792, as the French Revolutionary Wars escalated into a full-scale conflict pitting revolutionary France against coalitions of European monarchies, the Duke assumed a command role in the army of Condé. This émigré force, organized and led by his grandfather, the Prince of Condé, was no ragtag band. It numbered thousands and operated with discipline, participating in major campaigns. Notably, the army of Condé joined the Duke of Brunswick's invasion of France in the summer of 1792, an ambitious push intended to march on Paris and reinstall Louis XVI. The Duke distinguished himself in the vanguard, leading charges with the ardor and courage that earned him respect among his peers. Battles raged across the frontiers from the Rhine to the Alps, but fortune did not favor the royalists. Defeats mounted, and the army suffered heavy losses. The turning point came with the Peace of Luneville in February 1801, a treaty between France and the Holy Roman Empire that effectively ended the War of the Second Coalition. With no more funding or allies to sustain them, the Condé forces disbanded, leaving the Duke to seek refuge in exile. He chose Ettenheim, a serene town in the Grand Duchy of Baden, nestled close to the Rhine River and far from the revolutionary fervor still gripping France. Here, in this neutral territory part of the Holy Roman Empire, the Duke attempted to carve out a semblance of normal life. It was during this period that he entered into a secret marriage with Princess Charlotte Louise de Rohan, the niece of the notorious Cardinal de Rohan, infamous for his role in the diamond necklace affair that had tarnished Marie Antoinette's reputation years earlier. The marriage was private, conducted without fanfare, reflecting the Duke's diminished circumstances and the need for discretion in exile. Charlotte, a devoted companion, shared his quiet existence, hunting in the nearby forests and corresponding with fellow royalists. But this idyll was illusory. The shadows of politics loomed large, and fate was already conspiring against him. By early 1804, the political landscape in France had transformed dramatically. Napoleon Bonaparte, the Corsican artillery officer, who had risen meteorically through the ranks, was now first consul, wielding near absolute power following his coup d'état of 18 Brumaire in November 1799. His ambitions extended beyond mere consulship. Whispers of imperial coronation circulated in the salons of Paris, signaling his intent to establish a new dynasty. Yet opposition simmered beneath the surface. Royalists, nostalgic for the Bourbon kings, plotted ceaselessly to topple him and restore the monarchy. The most immediate threat was the Cadoudal affair, a conspiracy masterminded by Georges Cadoudal, a fierce Breton royalist and leader of the Chouannerie uprisings against the revolution. Cadoudal, who had evaded capture multiple times and even survived earlier plots, like the Rue Saint-Nicaise bombing in 1800, landed in France in August 1703 with British assistance, courtesy of the Royal Navy ship HMS Vincenzo. His plan, to kidnap or assassinate Napoleon en route to his Malmaison residence, then install a Bourbon prince in his place. Key accomplices included Jean-Charles Pichegru, a former revolutionary general turned royalist, and others backed by British intelligence and funding. Philippe d'Auvergne, a British spy master based in Jersey, facilitated Cadoudal's movements, underscoring London's vested interest in destabilizing Napoleon. French police, under the vigilant eye of Joseph Fouché, Napoleon's Minister of Police, went into overdrive, conducting arrests throughout February 1804. Cadoudal himself was captured after a dramatic chase, tried and guillotined on June 25, 1804, along with 11 comrades defiantly proclaiming to the crowd, "Now it's time to show the Parisians how Christians, Royalists, and Bretons die." This is where the threads twisted fatefully for the Duke of Enghien. Intelligence reports, often unreliable and fueled by paranoia, falsely implicated him in the Cadoudal plot. Agents claimed he was consorting with Charles-François Dumouriez, a defector general living in exile, and sneaking across the border for clandestine meetings in France. In reality, there was no evidence linking the Duke to Cadoudal, Pichegru, or the conspiracy. His only crime was his past service in the émigré armies, for which he had been condemned in absentia during the Revolution. Nevertheless, Napoleon viewed him as a potent symbol, a rallying point for royalists who dreamed of Bourbon restoration. The Duke represented the old order's last flicker, and eliminating him would send a chilling message: no threat, real or imagined, would be tolerated. Napoleon, ever the strategist, likened it to removing a vital piece from the chessboard to checkmate his enemies. Acting on these fabricated reports, Napoleon issued direct orders for a daring operation. On March 15, 1804, a detachment of French dragoons, led by Colonel Ordener, crossed the Rhine into neutral Baden territory, a blatant violation of international law that risked provoking the Holy Roman Empire and its allies. They surrounded the Duke's residence in Ettenheim at dawn, bursting in to arrest him amid confusion and protests from his household. The Duke, caught off guard, was seized along with his papers and belongings, then swiftly transported to Strasbourg for initial questioning before being rushed to the Château de Vincennes, a foreboding fortress on the outskirts of Paris that had once served as a royal residence but now functioned as a prison. Why Baden? The region was ruled by Charles Frederick, the Grand Duke, who happened to be the father-in-law of Tsar Alexander I of Russia. Russia, as a guarantor of the Holy Roman Empire's integrity, would see this incursion as a personal affront, heightening the diplomatic stakes. Napoleon, however, prioritized decisiveness over caution, believing the ends justified the means. At Vincennes, the proceedings accelerated with alarming speed, betraying the premeditated nature of the affair. A military commission was hastily assembled, comprising French colonels and presided over by General Pierre-Augustin Hulin, a veteran of the Revolution, known for his role in the Bastille storming. Behind the scenes, the true orchestrator was Anne Jean-Marie René Savary, Duke of Rovigo, Napoleon's trusted aide-de-camp and head of the gendarmerie elite. Savary arrived with explicit instructions from Napoleon to ensure a guilty verdict, even blocking any possibility of a personal audience between the Duke and the First Consul. The charges leveled against the Duke were twofold. First, that he had borne arms against France during the recent wars as part of the émigré forces. Second, that he intended to join a new coalition against the Republic. These accusations were flimsy at best, rooted in hearsay rather than proof, and the trial itself was a farce, conducted in secret, without witnesses for the defense or time for preparation. The Duke, maintaining his composure throughout, vehemently denied any involvement in plots, asserting his loyalty to his principles, but insisting on his innocence regarding the specific allegations. His pleas fell on deaf ears. The Commission, under Savary's pressure, drew up the Condemnation Act swiftly. The climax came in the eerie hours before dawn on March 21st, 1804, only 6 days after the kidnapping. The Duke was roused from his cell and led to the castle's moat, where a grave had been dug in advance, a grim detail that underscored the inevitability of his fate. Blindfolded and positioned against the damp stone wall, he faced a firing squad from the gendarmes d'élite, an elite unit handpicked for their loyalty to Napoleon. In his final moments, the Duke reportedly uttered words of poignant resignation. "I must die, then, at the hands of Frenchmen." The volley echoed through the night, felling the 31-year-old prince, the last direct heir of the House of Condé, as his father and grandfather would outlive him, but produce no further legitimate successors. His body was unceremoniously dumped into the prepared trench, covered with earth, and left unmarked. It wasn't until 1816, during the Bourbon Restoration under Louis XVIII, that his remains were exhumed and reinterred with honor in the Holy Chapel of Vincennes, a gesture that sought to atone for the injustice. The veil of secrecy surrounding the trial and execution was no accident. Napoleon orchestrated it to mitigate the inevitable uproar. News of a prince being snatched from neutral soil, tried in shadows, and executed on dubious grounds would ignite fury among Europe's monarchs, who saw in the Duke a mirror of their own vulnerabilities. By keeping details under wraps initially, Napoleon bought time to frame the narrative as a necessary defense against treason, avoiding an immediate diplomatic catastrophe. This tactic allowed him to consolidate power domestically, intimidating royalists into submission and clearing obstacles to his imperial aspirations. Indeed, just 2 months later, on May 18, 1804, he proclaimed himself Emperor Napoleon I in a lavish ceremony at Notre Dame Cathedral. Georges Cadoudal, from his prison cell before his own execution, captured the bitter irony. We wanted to make a king, but we made an emperor. Delving deeper into Napoleon's motives reveals a mix of pragmatism and paranoia. In later years, during his exile on St. Helena, and even in his last will, Napoleon defended the decision unapologetically, claiming it was essential for the safety, interest, and honor of the French people. He accused the Comte d'Artois, brother to the executed Louis XVI and future King Charles V, of dispatching 60 assassins to Paris, positioning the Duke's death as a preemptive strike against Bourbon machinations. But was it truly about imminent danger or a display of unyielding resolve? Historians suggest Napoleon's advisors played a role. Charles Maurice de Talleyrand, the cunning foreign minister, may have sown the idea, whispering that eliminating a Bourbon symbol would deter future plots. Talleyrand, ever the opportunist, later distanced himself, but contemporary accounts point to his influence. Conversely, Napoleon's wife, Josephine de Beauharnais, and her confidant, Madame de Remusat, pleaded fervently for mercy, arguing that sparing the Duke would demonstrate magnanimity. Napoleon rebuffed them, reportedly snapping that sentiment had no place in politics. The affair's legacy is encapsulated in a famous quip, "C'est pire qu'un crime, c'est une faute." It's worse than a crime, it's a blunder. Attributed variously to Talleyrand Fouché, or Antoine Boulay de la Meurthe, it highlighted the strategic miscalculation amid the moral outrage. The repercussions rippled across Europe like a shockwave. Royalty from London to Vienna recoiled in horror, viewing the execution as an assault on their class. Tsar Alexander I of Russia was incensed. Not only was Baden his father-in-law's domain, but Russia's role as protector of the Holy Roman Empire made the border violation a direct challenge. This indignation fueled the formation of the Third Coalition in 1805, uniting Russia, Austria, and Britain against France, leading to campaigns that would test Napoleon's military genius at Austerlitz and beyond. For the Bourbons in exile, any hope of reconciliation with Napoleon evaporated. They branded him a regicide anew, linking the Duke's fate to Louis XVI's guillotining. In France, paradoxically, the act bolstered Napoleon's support among revolutionaries who saw it as a firm stand against aristocratic resurgence, quelling domestic dissent and unifying the regime's base. Lucien Bonaparte's secret exile and British capture. Lucien Bonaparte came into the world on May 21, 1775, in Ajaccio, Corsica, as the third son to survive infancy in the family of Carlo Maria Buonaparte, an attorney with Italian heritage who pursued studies in Pisa and Rome prior to making Corsica his home, and Maria Letizia Ramolino, a determined and commanding presence from a well-known Corsican lineage who would eventually earn the title Madame Mère as the head of the Bonaparte line. He trailed his brother Napoleon by exactly 5 years and 9 months, with Napoleon arriving on August 15, 1769, and belonged to a sizable household featuring brothers and sisters such as Joseph, Napoleon, Elisa, Louis, Pauline, Caroline, and Jerome, even though a number of others passed away young. Raised in a simple yet mentally invigorating environment shaped by Enlightenment principles, efforts for Corsican self-rule, and the island's chaotic shift from Genoese control to French authority in 1768, Lucien faced tough times early on when his father succumbed to stomach cancer on February 24, 1785, at the age of 38, forcing Letizia to support the family on a slim allowance during financial woes worsened by the French Revolution. In spite of their limited means, education remained a priority for the Bonapartes. Lucien started his learning at the nearby seminary in Ajaccio, displaying a natural talent for languages and public speaking, before relocating to mainland France in 1784, thanks to a scholarship secured via family ties. He studied at the Collège d'Autun in Burgundy with Napoleon, sharpening his grasp of classics, and later moved to the École Militaire de Brienne-le-Château in Champagne between 1784 and 1786. Diving into military routines, math, and historical accounts, although he didn't share his brother's enthusiasm for warfare. Frustrated by the strict regimen, he spent a short time at the seminary in Aix-en-Provence, starting in 1786, exploring theology and philosophy, but deemed the religious vocation ill-suited to his budding Republican beliefs and passionate nature, prompting him to leave it behind by 1789. Heading back to Corsica right as the French Revolution ignited, Lucien dove into the turmoil eagerly, taking on the alias Brutus Bonaparte, as a nod to the Roman figure who slew Julius Caesar, representing his dedication to freedom and opposition to tyrants. He became active in local Jacobin groups, gave fiery addresses denouncing nobles and priests, and took part in political unrest such as the 1790 revolt in Bastia. By the middle of the 1790s, following the Bonapartes' escape from Corsica in 1793, because their support for France conflicted with Pasquale Pauli's independence push, Lucien made a new home in southern France, acting as a commissar for the army of Italy by managing provisions and troop spirits, while also involving himself in revolutionary courts to push for sweeping changes. His rise in politics sped up in 1798 with his election to the Council of 500, representing Corsica's Limone area, and swiftly building a name for his persuasive speaking and balanced Jacobin perspectives. The high point of his initial professional path occurred amid the coup d'etat of 18 Brumaire on November 9, 1799, serving as the council's president, where he orchestrated the body's breakup by calling in soldiers to empty the room during violent threats, memorably wielding a dagger and declaring, "I swear to stab my own brother to the heart if he ever attacks the liberty of Frenchmen," a theatrical move that quelled resistance and positioned Napoleon as first consul. This display of devotion brought him key appointments: Minister of the Interior from December 1799 to November 1800, where he streamlined governance, set up prefectures, advanced infrastructure like highways and waterways, and boosted the arts through museum creations and artist patronage, followed by serving as ambassador to Spain from 1800 to 1801, brokering the Treaty of Aranjuez to reclaim Louisiana for France and form pacts against Britain, and ultimately a profitable position in the Senate in 1802, enabling him to build riches via property and artwork investments. Still, Lucian stayed self-reliant, a well-read, versatile thinker who gathered uncommon texts, penned historical dramas like La Tribu Indienne and Stories, and pictured a genuine republic instead of Napoleon's growing dictatorship, paving the way for their unavoidable conflict regarding family matters and individual freedom. Lucian's choices in marriage highlighted his resistance to norms and power structures even more. His initial wedding on May 4, 1794, was to Christine Eugénie Boyer, the unassuming child of an inn owner from Saint-Maximin-la-Sainte-Baume in Provence, encountered during his revolutionary work in Toulon. This bond, fueled by true ardor that ignored social divides, in line with the revolution's equalizing ethos, resulted in two daughters, Charlotte, born 1795, who later wed Prince Mario Gabrielli, and Christine Egypta, born 1798, who married Count Arvid Posse and subsequently Lord Dudley Stuart, but concluded sorrowfully when Christine died from pulmonary tuberculosis on May 14, 1800, at 23 years old, soon after delivering a stillborn boy, making Lucian a mourning single parent with small kids. Looking for partnership and steadiness, he wed again on October 26, 1803, to Alexandrine Laurence de Blechamp, an enchanting and sharp-minded widow born February 23, 1778, in Saint-Domingue, now Haiti, to Jacob de Blechamp, a thriving banker and estate holder, and his spouse Catherine Marie-Jeanne Joliffe de la Rivière. Alexandrine had earlier tied the knot with Hippolyte Charles Jouberton, a financier, on August 9, 1798, having a daughter named Anna, born 1799, prior to his sudden passing in a maritime accident near the Canary Islands in 1799. Schooled in Parisian religious institutions, proficient in several tongues, and involved in writing communities, Alexandrine added elegance and networks to their connection. They crossed paths in trendy gathering spots at the Hôtel de Thelusin, connected through common passions for books and creativity, and exchanged vows in a hidden civil rite at Lucian's property in Plessis, Chamont, Oise, keeping it from Napoleon to dodge meddling. This covertness turned out wise, since Napoleon, strengthening his grand goals after naming himself consul for life in 1802, saw sibling weddings as tactical instruments, setting up pairings like his sister Caroline's with General Joachim Murat forming the Naples royal branch, or Brother Jerome's with Princess Catherine of Württemberg, strengthening links to Germany. For Lucian, Napoleon suggested a pairing with a noble Spanish princess, maybe Maria Luisa of Parma's offspring, to solidify the French-Spanish bond under Godoy's leadership and raise the Bonaparte heritage toward inherited rule. Brushing off Alexandrine as just a bourgeoise unsuitable for building a royal house, despite her riches and sophistication, Napoleon insisted on dissolving the marriage, pointing to its absence of family approval per the fresh civil code, and doubting its legality in intense exchanges, like a 1803 note accusing Lucian of betrayal. Lucian, steadfast in his loving beliefs and republican ethics, declined, responding in messages that stressed individual joy above strategic gain and cautioned against the risk of overextending empire. The dispute intensified, peaking with Lucien's absence from the 1804 crowning event at Notre Dame, where Napoleon placed the crown on his own head, and his official expulsion from the French palace, deprived of succession rights under the updated framework favoring Joseph's descendants. Moving to Italy in 1804, Lucian established himself in Rome with papal safeguarding, acquiring the Palazzo Nunez in 1805 and pursuing academic interests. As a grudging olive branch, Napoleon bestowed the title Prince of Canino in 1808, a modest holding in the Viterbo area where Lucian dwelled in the Villa Ruffinella, building an impressive assortment of Etruscan relics via digs at Volci, featuring pottery and tombs now housed in places like the Louvre. Beneath the splendor, this amounted to domestic banishment, ongoing oversight by French operatives, money limits, and efforts to part him from his offspring, exposing the deep divide in the Bonaparte kin, where Lucian's key part in Napoleon's climb was eclipsed by his choice to place affection above imperial demands, underscoring Napoleon's dictatorial grip and the family's hidden weaknesses. By 1810, while Napoleon's continental system burdened Europe and his realm extended from the Iberian Peninsula to Russian frontiers, including puppet states and compelled partnerships, Lucian's irritation reached its height due to increasing encroachments, including a foiled 1808 scheme by Napoleon to seize his children, pretending to offer them a suitable education in France at Saint-Cloud, which Alexandrine staunchly opposed. This breach of family privacy drove Lucien to plan a secret move to the United States viewed as a symbol of Republican merit and promise, free from Europe's tyrannies and endless conflicts. He especially respected Thomas Jefferson's rural visions and governmental structure, imagining an existence of authoring, agriculture, or possibly public service in a nation welcoming to those like him. Arrangements kicked off in spring 1810, with Lucian quietly selling off holdings to finance the trip, assembling his broad household. Alexandrine, their 9 youngsters at that point, including Charles Lucien, born 1803, a prospective bird expert, Lucien Louis, born 1813, but timeline note, actually offspring, like Christine, Letizia, Jean, Paul, Louis, Pierre, Antoine, Marie, Constance, some arriving later, stepdaughter Anna, along with educators, servants, attendants, and aides, adding up to roughly 40 individuals. They collected a wealth of prized items, works like Raphael's Madonna of the Candelabra, Titian's likenesses, gems, uncommon volumes, and dig discoveries worth more than 1 million francs to support their new life. Leaving from the impartial papal territories to bypass French checks, they probably set sail from Civitavecchia, 60 kilometers northwest of Rome, on August 4, 1810, on the American trading vessel Hercules, a 300-ton brig from Baltimore led by Captain John Barnes, posing as regular merchants en route to New York, using fake Sardinian documents labeling Lucian as Dominique Luciani or comparable covers. Thorough measures involve steering clear of Napoleonic harbors like Livorno, journeying by land undercover, and paying off authorities to preserve confidentiality, since a disclosure might trigger international fallout or chase, weakening Napoleon's story of family unity amid the peninsular conflict and strains with Russia. Lucian's dreams encompassed buying property in northern New York or the Louisiana area, lately transferred to the U.S., creating an independent homestead, and maybe releasing his writings without restraint, distant from oversight and brotherly control. The endeavor fell apart in a gripping sea encounter. On August 5, 1810, as they sailed the Tyrrhenian Sea along Sardinia's east shore, the Hercules met HMS Pomone, a powerful 38-gun Leda-class warship of the Royal Navy, set afloat in 1805 at Finsbury, Kent, and captained by Sir Robert Barry, a 36-year-old Scot with notable service in the Napoleonic fights, including engagements in the Caribbean and eventual takings of Chesapeake Bay strongholds in the War of 1812. Cruising to uphold the British embargo and snag French allies, Barry, commanding the fast 1,100-ton craft fitted with 18-pound guns and short-range cannons, noticed the Hercules displaying neutral American banners, but found it dubious given its path from Italian seas. Pomone approached, discharged a cautionary blast, and boarded unchallenged around midday. Checks uncovered Lucian's real persona via telling papers, lavish freight, and the group's noble demeanor, in spite of objections. The takeover was nonviolent, no losses since Lucian yielded to prevent fighting, handing over the vessel. Its load, including artwork subsequently sold in London for £40,000 with items joining the British Museum, and travelers as war spoils. Guided first to Cagliari on Sardinia for supplies, then to British-held Malta, where Governor Hildebrand Oakes evaluated the important captive. Lucian fruitlessly claimed neutral protections and asked for continuation to America, but got labeled an adversary under the Orders in Council, prized for insights into Napoleon's inner circle and anti-regime messaging. Handled with respect matching his rank, no shackles or lockdown on prison barges like those at Plymouth, the party voyaged to England, docking at Plymouth on December 23, 1810, sparking public interest. Given conditional release as a state prisoner by the Transport Board, Lucian stayed first at Thorngrove House in Grimley, Worcestershire, a roomy Georgian home on 200 acres, with fruit trees and barns leased for £300 yearly, then shifted in March 1811 to Denham House, known also as Denham Lodge, close to Ludlow, Shropshire, a refined neoclassical dwelling on 300 acres viewing the River Teme and Ludlow Castle, equipped with tidy landscapes, a filled book collection, and state-supplied help costing £1,000 annually. Release conditions permitted movement within 10 miles, social events and mail reviewed, but banned breakout tries or political involvement. Lucian mingled with Whig nobles like Lord Holland, mastered English, followed pastimes like plant studies and board games, and especially explored paleontology, gathering Jurassic remains from local pits and giving samples to the Geological Society of London, gaining honorary status in 1812. His kin adapted well overall. Young ones got individual lessons in knowledge and creativity. Alexandrine handled home matters elegantly, arranging gatherings with thinkers like poet Samuel Rogers. This phase, from 1810 to 1814, stood in sharp difference to Napoleon's trials, the ruinous 1812 push into Russia, costing over 500,000 French souls with the Grand Army's ruin at Borodino and the Berezina pullback, trailed by the Sixth Coalition's pushes in 1813, while Lucian savored a calm, forced break in opponent lands, mulling over his siblings' arrogance and his personal path. Napoleon's drive to bury the incident arose from a deliberate push to maintain his rule's image of unbeatable strength and togetherness. Framing the Bonapartes as an unbeatable, cohesive group, embodying France's revolutionary success and grand fate, any sign of abandonment threatened to reveal splits that might weaken citizen spirit, spur royalist schemes, or strengthen foes like the Austrian Habsburgs or Prussian Hohenzollerns amid the shaky continental blockade. Via subtle methods, private notes to police head Joseph Fouché directing watchfulness and false info, control of government media like Le Moniteur Universel to skip references, and quiet talks at court showing Lucian as willingly secluded in Italy. Napoleon crafted a shroud of quiet, sidestepping public statements that could heighten the issue. This method parallels the notorious isolation of Sophia Dorothea of Chell. Born September 15, 1666, in Chell, Lower Saxony, as the sole offspring of George William, Duke of Brunswick-Lüneburg-Schelle, and his unequal spouse Eleanor d'Esmier d'Olbreus, raised to Countess of Harburg, Sophia Dorothea stepped into a doomed arranged wedding on November 22, 1682, at 16 to her cousin George Louis, Hanover's electoral prince, later Britain's George I, designed to merge Celle's lands with Hanover and ensure Protestant inheritance under the Act of Settlement. The partnership, at first friendly and yielding two offspring, George Augustus, future George II, born 1683, and Sophia Dorothea, born 1687, later Prussia's queen, worsened due to George's aloofness, his blatant romance with Erengard Melusine von der Schulenburg, titled Duchess of Kendal in Britain, and Sophia's increasing loneliness at Herrenhausen Palace. Craving heartfelt bonds, she started an intense letter exchange and relationship around 1690 with Count Philip Christoph von Königsmarck, a striking Swedish aristocrat and Hanoverian officer famed for his war feats in the 9 Years' War and verse skills, sharing over 300 affection notes passed through trusted aides. Uncovered in July 1694 via seized communications, the romance sparked George's fury. Königsmarck vanished on July 1st, likely killed by palace agents on commands from George's father. Elector Ernest Augustus, his remains supposedly sunk in the Lena River, though unfound inspiring tales. Sophia Dorothea endured a sham trial, dissolved on December the 28th, 1694, on made-up charges of willful abandonment to evade an infidelity hearing that could involve George, and was locked away from age 28 in Alden House, a fortified manor in the Aller Valley, Lower Saxony, staying there till her passing on November the 13th, 1726 at 60, bearing 32 years of aloneness, stripped of her kids, never seen again. Limited to the premises with scarce guests like her mother later on, and wiped from formal Hanoverian and British annals to maintain lineage purity. George, rising to King George I in 1714 after Queen Anne's demise, continued the concealment, banning her name in royal circles and ruining images. Napoleon's method echoed this wiping out, avoiding direct jailing for Lucian and opting for exclusion, story management, and legacy cutoff. Both figures gave up relatives to protect their system's validity, showing how private controversies took a back seat to state needs in upholding dictatorial images. Jérôme Bonaparte's secret American marriage annulment. In the spring of 1803, Jerome's naval adventures took a dramatic turn when his frigate, the Pomone, part of a French squadron escaping British blockades in the Caribbean during the renewed Anglo-French hostilities, sought refuge in American waters. After a perilous journey marked by storms and pursuits, the ship docked in Baltimore, Maryland, on July 20th, 1803. Baltimore at this time was a booming seaport, the third largest city in the United States with a population exceeding 46,000, fueled by trade in tobacco, flour, and ships. Its harbor buzzed with merchant vessels from around the world, and its society was a mix of old money from the Revolutionary era and new wealth from commerce, hosting elegant balls, theaters, and gatherings that rivaled those in Philadelphia or New York. Wealthy families like the Catons and the Carrolls dominated social life, and it was in this vibrant setting that Jerome met Elizabeth Patterson, a woman whose poise and intellect would forever alter his path. Elizabeth, affectionately known as Betsy, was born on February 6, 1785 in Baltimore to William Patterson, an Ulster Scot immigrant who arrived penniless in 1766 but built a shipping empire through savvy investments in privateering during the American Revolution and subsequent trade ventures. By 1800, William was among Maryland's wealthiest men, second only to Charles Carroll of Carrollton, the last surviving signer of the Declaration of Independence, with estates including a grand home on South Street and investments in banks and land. Elizabeth, the eldest of 13 children from William's marriage to Dorcas Spear, received a refined education at home and in local academies, mastering French, literature, history, and music, while developing a sharp wit and independent streak that set her apart in an era when women were often confined to domestic roles. Her beauty was legendary. Contemporary accounts describe her as having raven black hair, piercing blue eyes, a porcelain complexion, and a slender, elegant figure that she accentuated with fashionable, often provocative attire inspired by Parisian styles, such as low-cut gowns that scandalized conservative Baltimore society. Elizabeth was no shrinking violet. She enjoyed horseback riding, intellectual debates, and social intrigue, embodying the spirited freedom of post-revolutionary America. Historical accounts differ on the precise moment Jerome and Elizabeth first met. Some suggest it was at a grand ball hosted by the Caton family at their estate, Castle Thunder, while others point to a dinner party at the home of Samuel Smith, a prominent senator and friend of the Pattersons. But consensus holds it occurred in late summer 1803 amid Baltimore's elite social scene. Jerome, aged 19 and fluent in English from his travels, was dazzled by the 18-year-old Elizabeth's sophistication and vivacity, seeing in her a refreshing contrast to the rigid European aristocracy. She was equally enchanted by this dashing naval officer, whose stories of battles at sea, life at Napoleon's court, and promises of grandeur evoked a romantic exoticism. Their courtship unfolded rapidly over the ensuing months, filled with the clandestine meetings, carriage rides through Baltimore's countryside, and fervent letters exchanging vows of eternal love. Jerome, smitten, proposed marriage in October 1803, presenting Elizabeth with a diamond ring said to be worth a small fortune. William Patterson initially hesitated, wary of the cultural and political ramifications of binding his daughter to a Frenchman amid tensions between France and Britain, and concerned about Jerome's youth and uncertain future. However, swayed by Elizabeth's determination and Jerome's assurances of Napoleon's approval, which were fabrications, William relented, stipulating a prenuptial agreement to protect her inheritance. On December 24, 1803, Christmas Eve, the couple exchanged vows in a discreet Catholic ceremony at the Patterson Mansion on South Frederick Street. The rite was performed by Bishop John Carroll, America's first Roman Catholic bishop and a cousin of Charles Carroll, with a small gathering of family and friends as witnesses, including Elizabeth's siblings and Jerome's naval companions. The marriage was duly recorded and legal under Maryland and U.S. law, celebrated with a festive supper, toasts, and dances. It was a match rooted in authentic affection, and by early 1804, Elizabeth discovered she was expecting their child, adding joy to their brief honeymoon period spent in Baltimore's social whirl and nearby estates. Yet, this idyll shattered when tidings of the union reached Paris in early 1804. Napoleon Bonaparte, then consolidating his power as first consul and preparing for his imperial coronation, erupted in fury upon receiving Jerome's letter announcing the marriage. To Napoleon, familial unions were instruments of diplomacy, designed to cement alliances with European royalty and nobility, not whimsical affairs with outsiders. He had already arranged strategic marriages for his other siblings, Joseph to Julie Clary, Louis to Hortense de Beauharnais, and envisioned a similar marriage for Jerome to strengthen the Bonaparte Empire. Elizabeth, despite her wealth and education, was deemed unsuitable. An American without titled lineage, from a merchant class Napoleon disparaged as bourgeois, and originally Protestant, she had converted to Catholicism just before the wedding, but this did little to assuage prejudices in devoutly Catholic France. Moreover, the match risked diplomatic complications with the United States, still neutral but wary of European entanglements, and could invite mockery from rival monarchies who viewed the Bonapartes as upstarts. Napoleon perceived it as a direct threat to dynastic purity in his grand designs, potentially diluting the family's noble pretensions at a time when he was negotiating treaties and conquests. Reacting swiftly, Napoleon dispatched a blistering letter to Jerome in March 1804, commanding his immediate return to France sans Elizabeth, branding the marriage null and void under French law, and threatening disinheritance if disobeyed. Your union with that woman is null and void in the eyes of religion and the law, he wrote, invoking codes that prohibited minors, Jerome was under 25, from marrying without parental consent and required consular oversight for overseas unions. Jerome, torn between love and loyalty, initially defied the order, remaining in America and even purchasing a home in Baltimore while awaiting Napoleon's softening, which never came. In April 1805, the couple set sail for Europe aboard the ship Erin, hoping to confront Napoleon directly. But upon reaching Lisbon, they learned of heightened French decrees barring Elizabeth from entry. French warships enforced the blockade, and when they attempted to land in Amsterdam, authorities under Napoleon's influence turned them away. Pregnant and devastated, Elizabeth sought asylum in England, arriving in London where she endured isolation and public curiosity as Madame Bonaparte. On July 7, 1805, in the suburb of Camberwell, she gave birth to their son, Jerome Napoleon Bonaparte, nicknamed Beau, attended by English physicians and supported by letters from her family. Jerome, meanwhile, had proceeded to France alone, succumbing to Napoleon's relentless pressure, including promises of military advancement and threats of exile from the family. Upon arrival, he was reprimanded but reinstated in the Navy, promoted to captain, and drawn into the imperial fold, gradually distancing himself from his American past. The annulment itself was a masterful orchestration of legal and political machinations by Napoleon to obliterate the marriage from existence. Commencing in 1805, he promulgated imperial decrees invalidating the union on multiple fronts. Napoleon leveraged the French Civil Code, Code Napoleon, of 1804, which stipulated that marriages abroad required ratification by a French official and that individuals under 25 needed familial approval, neither condition met. A family council convened in Paris formally denied consent retroactively, rendering the marriage void civilly by March 11, 1805. Napoleon then pursued ecclesiastical nullification, petitioning Pope Pius VII, whom he had compelled to travel to Paris for his 1804 coronation, amid strained relations following the Concordat of 1801. The Pope, however, rebuffed the request in a letter dated January 1806, affirming the marriage's validity as a sacrament since it involved free consent, a proper Catholic rite by Bishop Carroll, and no canonical impediments beyond the civil ones Napoleon fabricated. Undaunted, Napoleon offered bribes, including a magnificent gold tiara encrusted with jewels, valued at over 100,000 francs, but Pius VII stood firm, declaring, "The marriage is indissoluble. It cannot be annulled." Ignoring this, Napoleon manipulated pliant French clergy. In October 1806, the Archdiocese of Paris, under Cardinal Belloy, issued a decree dissolving the union on grounds of irregularity, though this was widely criticized as illegitimate without papal sanction. By 1807, French law prohibited any recognition of the marriage, with officials barred from registering it or acknowledging Elizabeth as a Bonaparte. Jérôme, now fully compliant, was elevated to admiral and integrated into Napoleon's campaigns, effectively coerced into abandoning his wife and son. Elizabeth, returning to Baltimore in 1805 after her English sojourn, confronted solitude and societal judgment, but resolved to raise Beau with pride in his heritage, educating him in elite schools and fighting for his rights through correspondence and legal appeals. The annulment's concealment amplified its intrigue, as Napoleon shrouded the affair in secrecy to shield Jérôme's ascending trajectory from scandal. Not satisfied with legal erasure, he suppressed public discourse, censoring newspapers and diplomatic channels to prevent leaks that could embarrass the empire. This veil was essential, for in August 1807, following victories at Jena and Auerstedt, Napoleon forged the Kingdom of Westphalia from conquered Hessian and Prussian lands, a constitutional monarchy spanning 42,000 square kilometers with over 2 million subjects, and crowned Jérôme its king at age 22. Ruling from the opulent Wilhelmshöhe Palace and Castle, Jérôme presided over a court renowned for extravagance, balls, operas, and hunts costing fortunes, while implementing Napoleonic reforms like abolishing serfdom and adopting the Civil Code. Exposure of a prior illegitimate marriage to an American and a bastard son could ignite gossip in Vienna, Berlin, and London, undermining Jérôme's authority among German nobles and fueling anti-Bonaparte propaganda from exiled royals. To fortify this new role, Napoleon orchestrated Jérôme's remarriage on August 22, 1807, to Princess Catherine of Württemberg, daughter of King Frederick I, in a lavish ceremony at the Tuileries Palace, securing an alliance with Württemberg and producing legitimate heirs, including Napoleon Joseph Charles Paul Bonaparte. Jérôme publicly renounced his American ties, though surviving private letters to Elizabeth reveal lingering affection and remorse, such as one in 1808, expressing sorrow but urging acceptance. Elizabeth, undeterred, adopted the title Madame Bonaparte, voyaged to Europe in 1810 and 1815 to lobby for recognition, and petitioned the French Senate and later Bourbon courts. Her persistence yielded partial victories. Post-Waterloo in 1815, the restored monarchy granted Beau a pension of 100,000 francs in 1820, though denying him succession rights. Elizabeth amassed her own fortune through real estate, becoming a celebrated salon hostess in Baltimore and Paris, where she mingled with luminaries like the Duke of Wellington and Talleyrand. Descendants flourished in America. Beau married Susan May Williams in 1829, siring Charles Joseph Bonaparte, who founded the FBI precursor as U.S. Attorney General under Theodore Roosevelt from 1906 to 1909, and Jerome Napoleon Bonaparte II, a West Point graduate who served in the U.S. Army. This lineage persists today, a testament to the Union's enduring legacy despite erasure. The concealment's intricacies and political drivers are meticulously chronicled in diplomatic dispatches, family papers, and court records. Napoleon's illegitimate children. Hidden by the court, Napoleon Bonaparte, renowned for his explosive temper, extraordinary strategic mind that revolutionized warfare through innovations like the core system and rapid maneuvers, and an insatiable ambition to forge a perpetual dynasty, he transformed from a revolutionary artillery officer into the Emperor of the French by December 2nd, 1804, in a self-coronation ceremony at Notre Dame Cathedral that symbolized his break from traditional monarchy. His marriage to Josephine de Beauharnais on March 9, 1796, when he was 26 and she was 32, was a union born of intense passion. Josephine, originally named Marie-Joseph Rose Tacher de la Pagerie, and hailing from a Creole family in Martinique, had endured the horrors of the French Revolution's reign of terror, imprisoned in the Carmes prison, where she witnessed daily executions and barely escaped the guillotine herself before her first husband, Alexandre de Beauharnais, was beheaded in 1794. She entered the marriage with 2 children, Eugène and Hortense, who Napoleon would later adopt and treat as his own, integrating them into his imperial family, Eugène becoming Viceroy of Italy and Hortense marrying Napoleon's brother Louis to produce future Napoleon III. Despite their profound mutual love, evidenced by Napoleon's ardent letters from campaigns where he professed undying devotion mixed with jealousy over her rumored affairs, the couple could not conceive a child together over their 13-year marriage, a failure that gnawed at their relationship amid whispers in the lavish salons and courts of Paris that Josephine's infertility stemmed from possible pelvic inflammatory disease contracted during her imprisonment, or perhaps from earlier miscarriages in her first marriage. As emperor, Napoleon faced mounting urgency to produce a male heir to stabilize his regime and prevent reversion to Bourbon rule, yet his genuine affection for Josephine, whom he called his incomparable, and who influenced his policies with her charm and social grace, made him reluctant to divorce her, dreading the emotional toll and potential public outrage in a society still reeling from revolutionary upheavals. Instead, he engaged in discreet extramarital relationships, siring children outside wedlock while the imperial court, including loyalists like his valet Constant and ministers like Talleyrand, facilitated sophisticated concealments to shield the marriage from scandal. Archival evidence, including letters and decrees, verifies at least 2 illegitimate sons: Charles Léon Denuel, born December 13, 1806, and Alexandra Florian Joseph Kolonowalewski, born May 4, 1810. These births were shrouded in deception through altered registries, anonymous funding from the emperor's private coffers, and strategic relocations to evade detection, all designed to spare Josephine humiliation and maintain the empire's veneer of stability during a time of constant warfare. Intriguingly, their lineages, especially the Kolonowalewski descendants, who rose to prominence in European diplomacy, were gradually absorbed into high society without fanfare, paralleling the discreet handling of extramarital offspring in other monarchies, such as the ongoing paternity dramas involving Monaco's Prince Albert II of the Grimaldi dynasty, whose scandals have persisted into 2025 with fresh allegations of secret payments to mistresses and children. Diving deeper into Charles Léon's narrative reveals a life that perfectly illustrated the dual-edged sword of imperial bastardy, blending fleeting opulence with lifelong marginalization. By 1806, Napoleon stood unchallenged after decisive victories like the Battle of Jena Auerstedt on October 14th, which dismantled the Prussian army in a single day and propelled French dominance into Central Europe, allowing him brief respites in Paris amid his relentless campaigns. It was during this era that Louise Catherine Éléonore de Noël de la Plaine, born September 13, 1787, to a bourgeois family with minor noble ties, crossed paths with the emperor. At just 18, she was employed as a lectrice or reader to Caroline Bonaparte Murat, Napoleon's ambitious sister, married to the flamboyant Marshal Joachim Murat, who would later become King of Naples, a position that facilitated intimate access to the imperial inner circle starting in late 1805. Éléonore's prior marriage to Jean-Honoré François Revel, a shady army lieutenant convicted of forgery and sentenced to 2 years in prison, provided Napoleon an opportunity to intervene. He orchestrated her divorce on April 15, 1806, using his authority to expedite proceedings in the courts, then lavishly housed her in a discreet townhouse on Rue de la Victoire, formerly Rue Chanterine, where he had lived with Josephine early in their marriage, symbolizing perhaps a subcon Napoleon Bonaparte renowned for his explosive temper, extraordinary strategic mind that revolutionized warfare through innovations like the corps system and rapid maneuvers, and an insatiable ambition to forge a perpetual dynasty. He transformed from a revolutionary artillery officer into the Emperor of the French by December 2, 1804, in a self-coronation ceremony at Notre Dame Cathedral that symbolized his break from traditional monarchy. His marriage to Josephine de Beauharnais on March 9, 1796, when he was 26 and she was 32, was a union born of intense passion. Josephine, originally named Marie Joseph Rose Tacher de la Pagerie, and hailing from a Creole family in Martinique, had endured the horrors of the French Revolution's reign of terror. Imprisoned in the Carme prison, where she witnessed daily executions and barely escaped the guillotine herself before her first husband, Alexandre de Beauharnais, was beheaded in 1794. She entered the marriage with 2 children, Eugène and Hortense, who Napoleon would later adopt and treat as his own, integrating them into his imperial family. Eugène becoming Viceroy of Italy, and Hortense marrying Napoleon's brother Louis to produce future Napoleon III. Despite their profound mutual love, evidenced by Napoleon's ardent letters from campaigns where he professed undying devotion mixed with jealousy over her rumored affairs, the couple could not conceive a child together over their 13-year marriage, a failure that gnawed at their relationship amid whispers in the lavish salons and courts of Paris that Josephine's infertility stemmed from possible pelvic inflammatory disease contracted during her imprisonment, or perhaps from earlier miscarriages in her first marriage. As emperor, Napoleon faced mounting urgency to produce a male heir to stabilize his regime and prevent reversion to Bourbon rule. Yet his genuine affection for Josephine, whom he called his incomparable and who influenced his policies with her charm and social grace, made him reluctant to divorce her, dreading the emotional toll and potential public outrage. In a society still reeling from revolutionary upheavals, instead he engaged in discreet extramarital relationships, siring children outside wedlock, while the imperial court, including loyalists like his valet Constant and ministers like Talleyrand, facilitated sophisticated concealments to shield the marriage from scandal. Archival evidence, including letters and decrees, verifies at least 2 illegitimate sons, Charles Léon de Nouel, born December 13, 1806, and Alexandra Florian Joseph Kolonowalewski, born May 4, 1810. These births were shrouded in deception through altered registries, anonymous funding from the emperor's private coffers, and strategic relocations to evade detection, all designed to spare Josephine humiliation and maintain the empire's veneer of stability during a time of constant warfare. Intriguingly, their lineages, especially the Kolonowalewski descendants, who rose to prominence in European diplomacy, were gradually absorbed into high society without fanfare, paralleling the discreet handling of extramarital offspring in other monarchies, such as the ongoing paternity dramas involving Monaco's Prince Albert II of the Grimaldi dynasty, whose scandals have persisted into 2025 with fresh allegations of secret payments to mistresses and children. Diving deeper into Charles Léon's narrative reveals a life that perfectly illustrated the dual-edged sword of imperial bastardy, blending fleeting opulence with lifelong marginalization. By 1806, Napoleon stood unchallenged after decisive victories like the Battle of Jena-Auerstedt on October 14th, which dismantled the Prussian army in a single day and propelled French dominance into Central Europe, allowing him brief respites in Paris amid his relentless campaigns. It was during this era that Louise Catherine Eleanore de Nouel de la Plaine, born September 13, 1787, to a bourgeois family with minor noble ties, crossed paths with the emperor. At just 18, she was employed as a lectress or reader to Caroline Bonaparte Murat, Napoleon's ambitious sister, married to the flamboyant Marshal Joachim Murat, who would later become King of Naples, a position that facilitated intimate access to the imperial inner circle, starting in late 1805. Eleanor's prior marriage to Jean-Honoré François Revel, a shady army lieutenant convicted of forgery and sentenced to 2 years in prison, provided Napoleon an opportunity to intervene. He orchestrated her divorce on April 15, 1806, using his authority to expedite proceedings in the courts, then lavishly housed her in a discreet townhouse on Rue de la Victoire, formerly Rue Chantereine, where he had lived with Josephine early in their marriage, symbolizing perhaps a subcon through French courts for decades amid Restoration politics hostile to Bonaparte. By 1821, guardianship shifted to Count Louis de Mosbourg, a former imperial chamberlain, but adolescent Léon had already succumbed to profligacy, dissipating his 12,000 franc yearly stipend, roughly equivalent to a modern 50,000 euro salary, affording fine clothes, horses, and soirees, on opulent balls at the opera, card games in smoky salons, and liaisons in bohemian quarters. At 17 in 1823, he absconded to Mannheim to reunite with Eleanor, perhaps craving maternal bonds or fleeing creditors, but returned to Paris by 1826, asserting emancipation at 20, yet perpetually insolvent, relying on odd jobs and connections. His physical likeness to Napoleon, compact frame at 5 feet 2 inches, sharp blue-gray eyes, aquiline nose, and resolute chin, as noted in portraits and contemporary sketches, sparked relentless curiosity, easing entry into salons hosted by Bonapartist sympathizers like the Duchess of Saint-Lô Hortense, while inviting derisive nicknames like Le Petit Napoleon and fueling tabloid speculation in papers like Le Figaro. Maturity proved even harsher for Léon, marked by financial ruin and fleeting redemption attempts that underscored his tragic inheritance. His gambling addiction, common among Restoration youth aping pre-revolutionary excess, culminated in massive debts exceeding 100,000 francs, landing him in debtors' prisons twice by 1838. First at Clichy, a grim facility for the genteel bankrupt, where he mingled with artists and nobles, and then Sainte-Pélagie, notorious for its squalor and political inmates like the future communard Louise Michel. Emerging embittered, he sought meaning in 1849 by establishing the Société Pacifique des Amis du Peuple, a socialist-inspired cooperative promoting worker self-help through shared farms and education, inspired perhaps by Fourierist ideals circulating in post-1848 France. But it collapsed due to mismanagement and apathy, forcing Léon to beg alms on streets he once strutted. Salvation arrived in 1852 with Napoleon III's coup, establishing the Second Empire, as nephew Louis Napoleon honored the St. Helena Testament, awarding Léon a 10,000 franc pension that stabilized his existence. At 55 in 1861, he wed Françoise Fanny Jaunet, born around 1838 as the daughter of his longtime gardener, Jean Jaunet from Pontoise. Bridging class divides in a modest ceremony, they produced 7 offspring, with 4 enduring past childhood: Charles, 1855, Gaston, 1857, Fernand, 1861, and Charlotte, 1867, whose lines extended the Bonaparte genes, tragically with 2 grandsons falling in the trenches of World War I at Verdun and the Somme, embodying France's sacrifices. Léon passed on April 14, 1881, age 74, from advanced stomach cancer in Pontoise, initially interred in a pauper's plot due to lingering poverty, but exhumed in 1882 for a proper burial funded by Bonapartist admirers, now marked by a simple stone in the town's cemetery. His progeny today scatter quietly across France, Belgium, and the Americas, upholding the lineage in obscurity, a quiet affirmation of how such bloodlines persist undetected. Caroline Bonaparte's secret betrayal of Napoleon, Maria Annunziata Carolina Bonaparte, born on March 25, 1782, in Ajaccio. As the baby of the Bonaparte clan, Caroline grew up in a household marked by Corsican resilience, familial closeness, and the revolutionary fervor that propelled her brother to power. The family home was modest, with Letizia enforcing strict discipline amid financial hardships after Carlo's death from stomach cancer in 1785. Caroline, nicknamed Carolina, or Cara, was educated informally at home before moving to France in 1793 amid Corsican unrest, where the Bonapartes fled after being branded traitors for supporting French rule. In Paris, she attended a boarding school for daughters of the nobility, learning etiquette, languages, and arts, which honed her charm and intellect. Napoleon, 13 years her senior, doted on her during her childhood, often spoiling her with gifts like dresses and jewelry from his campaigns. But he also instilled in her the expectation of unwavering loyalty to the family and the empire he was building, treating her almost like a daughter while demanding obedience. Caroline was intelligent, charming, and fiercely ambitious, traits that would define her later actions. She was known for her sharp wit, beauty with dark curls and piercing eyes, and a determination that sometimes clashed with her siblings, earning her a reputation as the most calculating Bonaparte. In January 1800, at the age of 17, she married Joachim Murat, a flamboyant and charismatic cavalry officer who had become one of Napoleon's most trusted commanders. Murat, born on March 25, 1767, in La Bastide-Fortunière, a small village in southern France, to an innkeeper father and a devout mother, had humble roots that belied his future grandeur. Initially destined for the priesthood, he studied theology but abandoned it during the Revolution, to join the army in 1787, rising quickly through the ranks with his natural leadership and horsemanship. He met Napoleon in 1795 during the suppression of the Royalist uprising in Paris, where Murat's timely delivery of cannons earned him promotion and lifelong favor. Known for his daring charges and extravagant style, complete with curly hair, plumed hats, embroidered uniforms in vivid colors like crimson and gold, and a saber always at hand, Murat earned fame in battles like those at Aboukir in Egypt in 1799, where he led a decisive cavalry assault against Ottoman forces, and Marengo in 1800, where his charge broke Austrian lines, securing victory for Napoleon. His bravery at Austerlitz in 1805, Jena in 1806, where he pursued Prussian remnants relentlessly, and the legendary charge at Eylau in 1807, braving a blizzard to smash Russian infantry, cemented his status as the first horseman of Europe. Napoleon encouraged the match, seeing it as a way to bind Murat closer to the family through marriage, rewarding his loyalty while tempering his vanity. It proved to be a genuine love affair, passionate and stormy, with Caroline admiring Murat's dash but often steering his impulsive nature. They had 4 children, though not without tensions, including rumors of infidelities on both sides. The couple's fortunes soared with Napoleon's. In 1706, they were named Grand Duke and Duchess of Berg and Cleves, a small but strategic duchy in Germany along the Rhine, where Caroline first tasted power, managing estates and courts with efficiency. But their real prize came in 1808, when Napoleon, after conquering southern Italy and defeating the Bourbon forces, deposed King Ferdinand IV, who fled to Sicily under British protection, and installed Murat as King of Naples, with Caroline as queen. Naples was far from a minor realm. It was a vibrant kingdom encompassing southern Italy and Sicily, though the island remained contested, with a population of about 5 million, diverse landscapes from fertile plains to rugged mountains, stunning features including the active volcano Mount Vesuvius that had buried Pompeii in 79 AD, ancient ruins like Pompeii and Herculaneum that fascinated scholars, and a bustling port city teeming with merchants, artists, and spies. However, it was also a powder keg of political intrigue, with scheming nobility loyal to the ousted Bourbons, peasant unrest fueled by heavy taxes and conscription, and constant threats from British forces based in nearby Sicily, who launched raids and supported insurgents. Caroline threw herself into queenship with vigor, transforming the court into a center of enlightenment and reform. She wasn't content to be a mere consort. She actively shaped policy, introducing French-style reforms such as modernizing education by establishing new schools, lyceums, and academies for both boys and girls, promoting literacy and sciences, building roads, bridges, and aqueducts to improve trade and agriculture, and patronizing the arts and sciences, inviting painters like Ingres and sculptors to her salons. She encouraged archaeological excavations at Pompeii and Herculaneum, bringing in experts to uncover mosaics, frescoes, and artifacts that enhanced Naples's cultural prestige and filled museums. Caroline also implemented the Napoleonic Code, reforming justice and administration to curb noble privileges, and boosted the economy through silk factories and coral jewelry production. Yet her rule wasn't without controversy. Many locals viewed her and Murat as foreign imposers, clashing with traditional Italian customs like religious festivals and feudal rites, leading to whispers of resentment, uprisings in Calabria, and guerrilla warfare. Rumors even swirled about Caroline's personal life, including alleged affairs with figures like the Austrian diplomat Prince Clemens von Metternich, whose charm and influence she encountered during diplomatic visits. Though these remain unproven and may have been spread by enemies to tarnish her reputation, portraying her as manipulative and promiscuous. By 1812, the cracks in Napoleon's empire were widening dramatically. His ill-fated invasion of Russia that year, launched in June with the Grande Armée of over 600,000 men from across Europe, aimed to enforce the continental system against Britain, but turned into a catastrophe. The Russians employed scorched earth tactics, retreating and burning supplies, while the French advanced deep into hostile territory, suffering from supply shortages, dysentery, and brutal skirmishes. The Battle of Borodino in September was a Pyrrhic victory, costing 30,000 French casualties, and Moscow's capture proved hollow as the city burned, and Tsar Alexander refused peace. The retreat in October amid the onset of winter decimated the army. Over 600,000 men entered Russia, but fewer than 40,000 returned, ravaged by freezing temperatures dropping to minus 30 degrees Celsius, starvation, Cossack attacks, and diseases like typhus that claimed thousands in agonizing deaths. This disaster emboldened his enemies, leading to the formation of the Sixth Coalition in 1813, comprising Austria, Prussia, Russia, Britain, Sweden, and smaller states, united by subsidies and a shared resolve to dismantle French hegemony. The Battle of Leipzig in October 1813, known as the Battle of the Nations, was a crushing defeat for Napoleon, with over 500,000 troops clashing over 3 days in Saxony, the largest battle in Europe before World War I. Murat fought valiantly there, leading cavalry charges that nearly turned the tide against Prussian and Russian forces. But betrayals by Saxon allies switching sides in overwhelming numbers forced a chaotic retreat with 60,000 French losses. Sensing the empire's vulnerability, Murat left the battlefield early, claiming illness from exhaustion and wounds, and hurried back to Naples to consolidate his position. It was here that Caroline's influence became pivotal. She had been monitoring the situation closely from the royal palace in Caserta, exchanging urgent letters with Murat that revealed her growing concern for their future amid reports of coalition advances and Napoleon's dwindling resources. In one December 1813 missive, she urged him, "We must think of our children, our future. Napoleon's misfortunes cannot be allowed to engulf us." With 4 young children, Achille, born 1801 and groomed as heir, Letizia, 1802, Lucian, 1803, and Louise, 1805. Caroline prioritized their security above all, fearing invasion would strip them of everything. This mindset set the stage for the betrayal. Caroline Bonaparte, Queen of Naples, conspired with Austria in 1814 to retain her throne, betraying Napoleon's empire. The Allies, particularly Austria, under the cunning Chancellor Metternich, were actively seeking to detach Napoleon's vassals through diplomatic overtures, offering guarantees in exchange for defection. Austria had a strong presence in northern Italy through its armies and posed a direct threat to Naples, with troops poised to invade if loyalty wavered. Murat initially hesitated, his loyalty to Napoleon forged in years of shared battles from Egypt to Russia, where he had risked life and limb, but Caroline, often described as the more politically astute of the pair, with her keen understanding of diplomacy and survival instincts, pushed him toward negotiation. Her correspondence shows her actively involved, writing to Murat with detailed plans, and even indirectly to Austrian diplomats to shape the terms, arguing that allegiance to a falling emperor would doom their kingdom. Negotiations began in late 1813, conductor of enlightenment and reform. She wasn't content to be a mere consort. She actively shaped policy, introducing French-style reforms, such as modernizing education by establishing new schools, lyceums and academies for both boys and girls, promoting literacy and sciences, building roads, bridges, and aqueducts to improve trade and agriculture, and patronizing the arts and sciences, inviting painters like Ingres and sculptors to her salons. She encouraged archaeological excavations at Pompeii and Herculaneum, bringing in experts to uncover mosaics, frescoes, and artifacts that enhanced Naples's cultural prestige and filled museums. Caroline also implemented the Napoleonic Code, reforming justice and administration to curb noble privileges, and boosted the economy through silk factories and coral jewelry production. Yet, her rule wasn't without controversy. Many locals viewed her and Murat as foreign imposers, clashing with traditional Italian customs like religious festivals and feudal rites, leading to whispers of resentment, uprisings in Calabria, and guerrilla warfare. Rumors even swirled about Caroline's personal life, including alleged affairs with figures like the Austrian diplomat Prince Clemens von Metternich, whose charm and influence she encountered during diplomatic visits, though these remain unproven and may have been spread by enemies to tarnish her reputation, portraying her as manipulative and promiscuous. By 1812, the cracks in Napoleon's empire were widening dramatically. His ill-fated invasion of Russia that year, launched in June with a Grande Armée of over 600,000 men from across Europe, aimed to enforce the continental system against Britain, but turned into a catastrophe. The Russians employed scorched earth tactics, retreating and burning supplies, while the French advanced deep into hostile territory, suffering from supply shortages, dysentery, and brutal skirmishes. The Battle of Borodino in September was a Pyrrhic victory, costing 30,000 French casualties, and Moscow's capture proved hollow as the city burned, and Tsar Alexander refused peace. The retreat in October, amid the onset of winter, decimated the army. Over 600,000 men entered Russia, but fewer than 40,000 returned, ravaged by freezing temperatures, dropping to minus 30 degrees Celsius, starvation, Cossack attacks, and diseases like typhus that claimed thousands in agonizing deaths. This disaster emboldened his enemies, leading to the formation of the Sixth Coalition in 1813, comprising Austria, Prussia, Russia, Britain, Sweden, and smaller states, united by subsidies and a shared resolve to dismantle French hegemony. The Battle of Leipzig in October 1813, known as the Battle of the Nations, was a crushing defeat for Napoleon, with over 500,000 troops clashing over 3 days in Saxony, the largest battle in Europe before World War I. Murat fought valiantly there, leading cavalry charges that nearly turned the tide against Prussian and Russian forces. But betrayals by Saxon allies, switching sides in overwhelming numbers, forced a chaotic retreat with 60,000 French losses. Sensing the empire's vulnerability, Murat left the battlefield early, claiming illness from exhaustion and wounds, and hurried back to Naples to consolidate his position. It was here that Caroline's influence became pivotal. She had been monitoring the situation closely from the royal palace in Caserta, exchanging urgent letters with Murat that revealed her growing concern for their future amid reports of coalition advances and Napoleon's dwindling resources. In one December 1813 missive, she urged him, "We must think of our children, our future. Napoleon's misfortunes cannot be allowed to engulf us." With 4 young children, Achille, born 1801 and groomed as heir, Letitia, 1802, Lucian, 1803, and Louise, 1805, Caroline prioritized their security above all, fearing invasion would strip them of everything. This mindset set the stage for the betrayal. Caroline Bonaparte, Queen of Naples, conspired with Austria in 1814 to retain her throne, betraying Napoleon's empire. The Allies, particularly Austria under the cunning Chancellor Metternich, were actively seeking to detach Napoleon's vassals through diplomatic overtures, offering guarantees in exchange for defection. Austria had a strong presence in northern Italy through its armies and posed a direct threat to Naples, with troops poised to invade if loyalty wavered. Murat initially hesitated, his loyalty to Napoleon forged in years of shared battles, from Egypt to Russia, where he had risked life and limb. But Caroline, often described as the more politically astute of the pair, with her keen understanding of diplomacy and survival instincts, pushed him toward negotiation. Her correspondence shows her actively involved, writing to Murat with detailed plans and even indirectly to Austrian diplomats to shape the terms, arguing that allegiance to a falling emperor would doom their kingdom. Negotiations began in late 1813. Kundukun opposed from the south, while he defended France proper against invasions from the east. Murat's troops marched north, clashing with Eugene's forces in battles like the Mincio River crossing, opening a southern front that diverted precious resources and morale. It acted like a domino, encouraging other waverers like Saxony and Bavaria to defect, hastening the empire's collapse through a cascade of abandonments. Napoleon, fighting desperately in the 6 Days Campaign in February 1814, with brilliant but futile victories at Champaubert and Montmirail, could not stem the tide. By March, Paris fell to the Allies, and on April 6, 1814, under pressure from his marshals in the Senate, Napoleon abdicated unconditionally at Fontainebleau, renouncing the throne for himself and his heirs. He was exiled to the tiny island of Elba off Italy's coast, granted sovereignty there as a consolation but stripped of his empire, marking the end of his first reign and leaving Europe to redraw its maps at the Congress of Vienna. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up, let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.